No, it's a great pleasure to be with you here today
Always.
and have the opportunity to talk.
Always. So as we begin this discussion of Jewish values, I wanted to ask you what you thought the core Jewish values that were relevant to this time in Israel, in the US, around the world.
You know, I think for every person in this room, one of the reasons you're here is those core values are part of your vision of the world, of J Street's vision of the world. And I just have to say a word about Jeremy here. What an extraordinary visionary he was. I confess I'm a little biased. I knew his parents really well. They helped shape this extraordinary young man with their values and their love of Israel. His mother grew up in the congregation. My dad was a rabbi for 50 years. I was the rabbi and met Jeremy at my congregation when he was a second grader. So I have a particular stake in everything that Jeremy does in a sense of pride. Look, you know the values, the fundamental dignity of every human being based in the notion that we are created in the image of the divine. The fundamental equality of all people derived from the Agadic understanding. Why were we descended from one couple, Adam and Eve? Why was Adam made of the dust of the four corners of the earth? So that none of us can claim that the yichus, the merits of our ancestors was greater than anyone else's. We're all descended from the same couple, all brothers and sisters, or as the great medieval Agadic text, Yalkut Shimoni says, I call on heaven today to witness whether Jew or non-Jew, free person or slave, man or woman, the divine judges each of us by our actions. So the idea of freedom of choice, so indispensable to democracy. None of the ideas of the fates that played games with human destiny, as some schools of Greek thought, or Calvinist predestination, or even Catholic original sin. We were all born free to make our choices and held accountable. Our vision is, I've set before you this day the blessing and the curse, good and evil. I can tell you what you should do and why, but if my word is to live on earth, God, it seems as though God is saying, it will be because of the choices you make. The idea of the rule of law. When Nathan the prophet confronts David and says, thou art the one. When Ahab is confronted by Elijah over Naboth's vineyard, we're taught even the highest human ruler is held accountable to God's law. All of the rules of law in the Rambam's writings set out both the extraordinary powers of the key executive, but also the limitations of those. A message for whether we're talking about the last administration in this country or to Bibi Netanyahu, who I suspect seeks out of this election a get-out-of-jail card free. Here, the belief that the ger, the stranger in our midst, is entitled to the same benefits that the Jew has, the social benefits that a Jew has, and above all, what resonates throughout all of Jewish thought, that we are commanded to be rodfei shalom, pursuers of peace. Peace, not pax, not the absence of war, but of wholeness, of making whole, of healing, of really creating a world of justice and peace for all. These are the values that underlie democracy. These are the values to which J Street is committed. These are the values that animate the extraordinary work of one of Israel's greatest champions for gay rights and women's rights and the immigrant rights and the rights of non-Orthodox Jews in Israel, and is such an important leader in the battle against racism, now heading Israel's preeminent civil rights group. So Noah, here, what do you see in terms of the values? How do those values get applied to what are the significant challenges that Israel faces at this moment?
Yeah, so we come to these challenges. we're now at the shock and awe period of the Israeli government, which is very reminiscent of the 100 executive orders of the first days of the Trump administration, or even before that. So if you're feeling a little shell-shocked, I hear you. And what we've been doing at ACRI, ACRI is the only organization in Israel that advocates across the full scope of civil and human rights for anybody under Israeli jurisdiction. So we've spent the past few weeks really mapping every bill that has been proposed by members of the incoming coalition, position papers from the right-wing think tanks, in order to create a map of the threats that this government poses to democracy and human rights. And let me tell you, even if we prioritize only the things that would be irreversible, it is a long list, and it varies from the threats to the freedom of expression and freedom of protest, through the monitoring and the surveillance of protesters and increased police brutality under the new Ministry of Ben-Gvir. It goes to the banning of political representation of the Palestinian society in Israel through various judicial attempts. It, of course, pertains to the attempts to suppress the independence of the judiciary and the ongoing suppression of Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories. And we're doing this mapping because while we understand that the threats we're facing will take generations to overcome. We've faced a defeat which will have disastrous impacts. But anything that we can mitigate, any risk that we can block, any threat that we can stop, will also have generations of impact. So our role now is more important than ever. We start every staff meeting and every post on Facebook with saying, we are ready. We are ready for this challenge, and we will be here to use every tool that we have in order to face the threats. And the threats are, thank you. And the threats are very much connected. So in my visit here, I've met with death penalty experts because there is talk about instituting death penalty in Israel. We've never had death penalty. We've been hearing about evangelical groups pouring millions of dollars into Israel in order to start an anti-abortion movement in Israel where we've never had one. So our stories are very connected, and we need to learn from each other. We need to support each other in the difficult years ahead.
So let me ask you to follow up on one of those in particular. I talked about the rule of law. And in the Jewish tradition, the structure during the time of the Sanhedrin was a kind of court that could make the final decisions. But even throughout Jewish history, the whole responsa system was functionally appeals court. The local authorities couldn't decide, or there was a difference of opinion, and it went up to somebody who is ruling on it because of their merit, because they were wise and offered insight. So that really was an appeal. Now we see the entire structure of Israel's rule of law being threatened by those who would restrict the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. What would be the impact of that happening to civil rights and to democratic freedoms in Israel?
Because of the makeup of the Israeli system, where we have only one house of parliament and we have very little separation between the legislative and the executive branches, the Supreme Court is really the center check and balance on the Israeli government's policy, actions, legislation. And attempting to undermine that would have disastrous effects on the protection of minorities, all minorities in Israel, and the protection of the rule of law and the democratic structure. And what we know is that right now it looks like they're protecting the majority rule. But over time, once you undermine the judiciary, then the leaders will also damage the very structure of the election system. So it will only protect the majority rule right now, and not the majority rule of future generations. And I think that that's really the threat that we're facing. It will be multi-layered. There will be many stages to this, and we need to be paying attention. And while the Supreme Court has always been the chief protector of human rights and democracy in Israel, there's another central check and balance that we've always had, which was the American government. And that has really faded during the Trump administration. And now is the time for all of you, I'm looking at you, to push to bring that back. And that could have a vital impact on where we stand.
And I really think, look, we're going to hear from the Secretary of State soon. So this is, an extraordinary time to be thinking about that impact. The call that Jeremy laid out last night about trying to add some real heft to the accountability of Israel to American support really would be, I think, a significant step in the direction of achieving that. But in terms of the relationship of the two, I think that everyone has kind of caught up with the recognition from our perspective of the damage that this government can do to support from the United States and to support from the American Jewish community. Abe Foxman's kind of stunning setting down of the red lines of what would happen if Israel walks away from being a democratic country and the damage it would do to U.S.-Israel relations and the American Jewish community's relations. How much of a perception do the Israeli people have about that damage that could be done? How much concern do politicians have, even in what will be the governing coalition? And do they care, or do they just assume it's inevitable that they'll have American support?
I think that Israel is very used to taking American support for granted. And we now have a government that we've never had before. So it requires steps that have never been taken before. And I think that once that becomes clear, the impact will be dramatic. And again, we are in a blocking offensive here, and that's what we need to be focusing on, to thinking about the critical moments where we need to use all the levers that we can, and the US government opinion, statements, and action would be very, very significant, as well as the reaction of the American Jewish community. So I think that the veer towards the evangelicals was not because Israel didn't want the Jewish vote. It's because Israel assumed that they could do both. And if there's a demonstration that that is impossible, I think that the Jewish community voice will be much more impactful.
When we've read about things that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have said, particularly about Palestinians, both Israeli Arabs and the Palestinian community, the possibilities of significant restrictions, shutting down those organizations that stand up for those rights, not just in the Palestinian community, but they've been talking about shutting down human rights organizations of Israeli Jewish human rights organizations as well. What do you think politically, actually, they would be able to? Isn't it weird to be talking about Bibi Netanyahu is the left wing of a government of Israel here? What is really feasible that they could actually try to do, and what impact would it have on Israel if they succeed in fulfilling some of these values?
So how does it feel sitting on stage next to an existential threat?
Yeah.
Like it? So yeah, the right-wing government has already expressed the concern about human rights organizations. And I want to tell you that on the first day after the elections, we bought the billboards outside of the Supreme Court of Israel, and we said, we continue to fight for human rights. And that's where we position ourselves, in opposition to this government. And the fact that they see us Thank you. The fact that they see us as a threat means we're doing a great job. And I think that will continue to be the issue. I mean, I think that as long as we are providing resistance, the government will try to shut us down in different ways. In the past, legislation was about banning of raising funds or receiving funds or a special taxation on the organization. that are promoting human rights, and that now is the important time to understand that the resources of the human rights organizations in Israel are so limited that these attempts could have very devastating effects on our work. And that's why also this is a place where in the past the US government has intervened, and I'm wondering whether the US government and other governments will intervene as well.
Both in terms of the Palestinian human rights groups and the Jewish Israeli human rights.
So the Palestinian human rights groups, and we have, I'll plug in a promo, we have a panel tomorrow about shrinking democratic space in Palestinian society, where we will talk extensively about the Palestinian human rights groups. The situation of the Palestinian human rights groups, they are currently designated terrorist organizations in the West Bank. They're not, there is a legal process about the Israeli designation that is still ongoing, but the organizations are open. The bank accounts are working, the staff is coming to the office, they're doing their vital work for human rights. And one of the great concerns is that now the government will try to take further action against the organizations, and again, here the support of the international community in any way possible is very significant.
And you know, this does seem to be an issue that is a global issue. It isn't just Israel, it isn't just the United States. The Freedom House that monitors human rights and democracy across the globe points out, with ebbs and flows every year, if you look from 1949 to 2006, there was a continuous growth of democracy and human rights, with back and forth. The midpoint continued to grow expansively. And in almost every year since 2006, that has reversed now, with the growth of autocracy across the globe, the restriction, the shrinking of a free press, of the right to protest, of democratic structures, the rule of law in country after country after country across the globe, and threats even in what we saw as some of the strongest democracies, including the United States, and the rise of right-wing groups in Europe as well, in right-wing parties getting stronger and stronger footholds in European countries. You know, we're blessed to have a Secretary of State who I was honored to serve under, who really has been extraordinary in his commitment to human rights, to protecting God's creation, fighting climate change, and ending the threats of nuclear war. It is an extraordinary moment in human history in which we're making decisions about Israel, about the United States, about the world that will have the most demonstrable impact on the future of humanity of any generation before us. So let's go forward with courage, for your agenda is an awesome agenda that can transcend challenges and smash limitations. And that belief in human rights, democracy, freedom, and peace is needed more now than ever before. God bless in everything that you do.
Thank you. And we are facing unprecedented threats, and we have a greater role than ever, and we are ready. This is our time to make a difference. Thank you.
It is indeed.